Elena Vale had one rule: never interrupt an enemy while they are destroying themselves. For 3 years, she sat in a wheelchair, eyes lowered, hands still, letting her husband Adrian parade his mistress through her mansion like a replacement queen. Serena wore Elena's diamonds. Adrian's mother sold Elena's antiques. His brothers opened her vaults, and every time they mocked the crippled wife who could not fight back, Elena only smiled. Because the wheelchair was never her prison. It was her disguise. Adrian thought he had won the day. He dragged her to the gates and threw her into the rain, announcing that Serena would take her bedroom, her name, and her place at the head of the family. By midnight, the Vales were auctioning Elena's estate to celebrate. By morning, they were begging for mercy. What they never knew was that Elena Cross was not a dependent wife. She was the hidden founder of Maison Eclat, a $20 billion fashion empire so powerful it controlled the careers, debts, contracts, and reputations of everyone in that room, including Serena, who had spent years worshipping a boss she had never seen. So Elena let them sell. Let them lie. Let them sign their own ruin in gold ink. Then at Adrian and Serena's engagement gala inside her stolen ballroom, the music stopped. The screens turned on. Every theft, affair, forged signature, and betrayal appeared before the world. And Elena walked in. Not wheeled in. Walked. Serena dropped to her knees. Adrian went pale. His family watched their empire collapse in real time as Elena reclaimed the mansion, cancelled their fortune, and blacklisted every name that had touched her betrayal. They thought they had buried a broken woman. They had awakened the woman who owned them. And tonight, she had only just begun. The first sound after Elena entered was not a scream. It was a champagne flute, slipping from Adrian Vale's hand and breaking against the marble floor. The crystal shattered at his feet, spreading in bright pieces beneath the chandelier light. For one strange second, every guest stared at the glass instead of at the woman standing in the doorway. Maybe broken things were easier to understand. Maybe a fallen glass made more sense than Elena Vale walking into a ballroom where everyone had spent 3 years accepting that she never would again. Serena's face changed first. The color drained from her cheeks, but her mouth stayed lifted in a frozen smile, as if her body had not yet received the news that her future was over. Her engagement dress was white silk with a cascade of hand-sewn pearls down the bodice. Elena recognized the design immediately. She had sketched the original version on a train from Milan to Paris 9 years earlier, when Maison Eclat was still small enough that she had carried fabric samples in a cracked leather suitcase. Serena had stolen the dress from an unreleased collection. That too had been recorded. Elena stepped forward, the sound of her heels cutting through the silence. The ballroom seemed to shrink around her. Gold-framed mirrors reflected her from every direction, multiplying her image until Adrian looked surrounded by the woman he had thrown away. "Elena," he whispered. She did not answer him. She looked around the room instead. At Vivian Vale, Adrian's mother, standing beside the auction table with one hand clamped over the necklace she had taken from Elena's jewelry room. At Benedict and Charles, Adrian's brothers, who had spent the evening laughing about selling dead-weight assets to cover the family's debts. At Serena, kneeling now because shock had made her legs useless. And at the guests, bankers, designers, investors, editors, lawyers, all of them holding their breath as the screens behind the orchestra continued playing the evidence. There was Adrian in the East Salon, kissing Serena beneath Elena's portrait. There was Vivian telling the household staff to remove Elena's family photographs because a disabled woman should learn to live with less. There was Benedict opening a vault with a forged authorization. There was Charles laughing into his phone as he listed Elena's inherited estate pieces under the Vale family trust. There was Serena standing in Elena's closet, fastening Elena's diamond earrings as she whispered, "Poor thing. She'll watch me become her." The room heard every word. Elena stopped at the center of the ballroom. 3 years earlier, she had stood in that same spot on the night of her wedding reception, dressed in ivory satin, wearing no crown, no diamonds, only a thin gold bracelet from her grandmother. Adrian had held her hand then with convincing tenderness. He had looked at her as if she were rare, as if she were worth protecting. "You'll never be alone again," he had told her. The memory almost made her smile. Not because it hurt, because it had taught her something useful. People rarely lied with new words, they lied with old wishes. Adrian had not loved Elena. He had loved what he thought she could give him, dignity, mystery, and access to wealth he had never been able to touch. The Vales were an old family with old portraits, old scandals, and old debts hidden behind polished silver and inherited manners. They lived like royalty, but their accounts had been rotting for years. Elena had known that before she married him. She had known more than he ever suspected. The first time she met Adrian Vale, he had been standing under the glass ceiling of a charity museum gala, speaking to an elderly donor about art restoration. He wore a navy suit, spoke gently, and listened with the patient expression of a man who had never needed to hurry. Elena had been there under her birth name, Elena Cross, invited as a quiet sponsor of the museum's textile wing. No one knew she was Maison Eclat's founder. To the fashion world, the empire's owner was an invisible figure called AC, a ghost with perfect taste and merciless contracts. At 29, Elena had already learned the power of being underestimated. Her grandmother, Marable Cross, had taught her that. Marable had been a seamstress in a narrow shop that smelled of steam, lavender soap, and old wood. She could mend a torn hem so perfectly the cloth looked reborn. She could glance at a woman's posture and know whether the dress made her feel beautiful or trapped. When Elena was 9, Marable placed a needle in her hand and said, "Cloth remembers every hand that touches it, so do people." Elena had not understood then. Years later, she built an empire on that sentence. Maison Eclat began with 7 dresses, 1 rented studio, and a promise that no woman would ever wear something designed to make her disappear. The first collection sold out in 48 hours. The second was copied by 3 luxury houses. The third made editors fly across continents just to see what EC would do next. But Elena stayed hidden. She had watched fame destroy people faster than poverty. Fame made others feel entitled to your face, your voice, your mistakes, your pain. So she built the company through layers of trustees, executives, and ironclad legal walls. Her employees knew the founder only through letters, design notes, and an annual speech delivered by a woman with silver hair named Margaret Bellamy, Elena's oldest friend and the public chairwoman of Maison Eclat. The secrecy became legend. Serena Mora had once called AC the god of fashion in an interview. Elena remembered that now as Serena trembled on the ballroom floor. "Stand up," Elena said softly. The command moved through the room like a blade sliding from silk. Serena tried, her hands shook. The pearls on her dress caught the light, each one looking suddenly less like decoration and more like evidence. Adrian took 1 step toward Elena. "This is impossible." "No," Elena said, "it is inconvenient, there's a difference." Someone near the back gasped. Adrian's eyes dropped to her legs, then rose to her face. For 3 years he had looked at her and seen a burden. Now he looked at her and saw calculation. The change terrified him more than anger would have. "You lied," he said, voice cracking. Elena tilted her head. "To a liar." Vivian Vale recovered before her son did. She had always been the quickest snake in the garden. Tall, silver-haired, and elegant, in a way that depended heavily on other people being afraid of her, Vivian stepped forward with the necklace still shining at her throat. "This is theatrical nonsense," she said. "You are clearly unwell, Elena, whatever you think you have seen or heard." The screen behind her changed. Vivian's own voice filled the ballroom. "Get the cross necklace appraised first," the recording said. "If Elena asks, tell her it's locked for insurance. She can barely move. What will she do, crawl after it?" Vivian stopped speaking. Elena looked at the necklace. "That belonged to my grandmother." Vivian's hand fell away from it as though it had burned her. For a moment, Elena was no longer in the ballroom. She was 16 again, standing in Maribel's shop after closing, watching her grandmother unlock a small blue box. Inside lay the necklace, a delicate line of old diamonds with a hidden clasp shaped like a tiny crescent moon. It was not the most expensive piece Elena would ever own, not even close, but Maribel had touched it as if it contained a heartbeat. "This was your great-grandmother," she had said. "She wore it the day she opened her first shop. People told her women like us should sew for rich families, not build names of our own." "What did she say?" Elena had asked. Maribel smiled. "Nothing, she opened the shop anyway." Elena had kept that lesson longer than the necklace. Do not argue with people who need your silence. Build something so large they are forced to hear it. The screen changed again. Now it showed the contract Adrian had signed that afternoon to auction the East Wing collection, including 3 paintings, 4 sculpture studies, rare couture archives, and Maribel's original sewing machine. The signature was Adrian's. The authorization was forged. The beneficiary account was tied to a shell company Vivian had created. A legal seal appeared at the bottom of the screen. Then another. Then another. The guests began whispering. Adrian looked over his shoulder at the screens, then at the guests, then at Elena. She watched the exact moment he realized the evidence was not just embarrassing, it was fatal. "Elena," he said, lowering his voice into the tone he used when he thought softness could replace truth. "Whatever happened between us, we can discuss it privately." She almost laughed. Privately was where men like Adrian buried women. "No," she said, "you discussed my humiliation publicly, you moved your mistress publicly, you sold my estate publicly, you announced your engagement under my roof publicly, so now we will finish publicly." Serena flinched at the word mistress. That was the thing about people who stole from another woman's life. They preferred prettier titles. Fiancé, partner, soulmate, future wife. Elena knew because she had spent 3 years hearing them all through half-open doors. The first year after the accident, Adrian had still pretended to care. The accident itself had happened on a road slick with rain outside the Vale country estate. Elena remembered the flash of headlights, the sharp turn, Adrian's hand leaving the steering wheel to answer call from Serena, though Elena had not known Serena's name then. She remembered waking in a hospital room with white curtains and a doctor telling her there had been spinal trauma, swelling, uncertainty. Adrian sat beside her bed, pale and beautiful, pressing her hand to his lips. "I'll take care of you," he had said. For 2 months, perhaps he tried. Or pretended to. He read messages beside her bed. He spoke to doctors. He accepted sympathetic calls. The Vales performed tragedy with perfect manners. Vivian arranged flowers. Benedict handled family matters. Charles oversaw temporary financial decisions. They all moved around Elena as if she were present but no longer participating in her own life. What they did not know was that Elena's private physician, Dr. Ilian Markovic, had been sent by Margaret Bellamy. What they did not know was that Elena's paralysis had never been absolute. The trauma had been real, the pain had been real, the uncertainty had been real, but within months, hidden from the Vale family, Elena began to regain sensation. First a flicker in her toes, then pressure, then movement. Then, under brutal private therapy in a locked rehabilitation room beneath Mason Eclat's wellness facility, she stood for 6 seconds. 6 seconds became 30. 30 became 3 minutes. 3 minutes became 10 steps across a mirrored floor, sweat cold on her back, her hands shaking so violently Margaret cried when Elena reached the wall. "You should tell them," Margaret had said. Elena looked at herself in the mirror, thin from recovery, pale, furious. "No," she said. Margaret had stared. "Elena. They've started showing me who they are." And they had. Adrian's kindness thinned first. He began missing appointments, then dinners, then nights. Vivian stopped asking Elena what she wanted and began telling staff what Elena could tolerate. Benedict and Charles began requesting access to accounts for estate continuity. Serena appeared at the mansion as a consultant for a charity fashion event, and Adrian's eyes followed her with the hunger of a man who had already made excuses to himself. Elena watched. She listened. She remembered Marable threading needles at midnight, saying, "A hem comes undone slowly before the dress falls apart." So Elena let the hem loosen. In the ballroom, Margaret Bellamy stepped from the side entrance, dressed in black with Mason Eclat's gold insignia pinned to her lapel. The room reacted to her immediately. Editors recognized her. Investors straightened. Designers whispered. Serena stared, as if a ghost from a magazine cover had entered her nightmare. Margaret carried a slim folder. Elena did not look at it. She already knew every page. Margaret walked to the center of the room and addressed the guests with the calm authority of a woman who had spent decades making billionaires wait in hallways. "As of 1 hour ago," she said, "Mason Eclat has terminated all contracts connected to Vale Holdings, Vale Heritage Management, and all subsidiary shell entities used in the unauthorized liquidation of cross-family assets. Emergency injunctions have been filed in London, Paris, New York, Milan, and Geneva. Every item sold tonight has been frozen pending recovery." Benedict made a strangled sound. "You can't do that." Margaret turned to him. "We did." Charles grabbed his phone. "My accounts aren't loading." "No," Elena said, "they are not." Adrian looked at her with open disbelief. "You had no right." That time, the laughter did come. Not from Elena. From somewhere near the back, a young fashion editor covered her mouth too late. The sound broke the room's tension in the cruelest possible way. People began looking at Adrian not as a powerful man under attack, but as an idiot who had complained that a robbed woman had no right to lock her own doors. Elena stepped closer to him. "I had every right," she said. "You sold what was mine, you used forged authority, you misrepresented ownership, you involved investors, you implicated your family, and worst of all, Adrian, you were sloppy." His jaw tightened. He had always hated being called careless more than being called cruel. Cruelty to men like him could be dressed as passion. Carelessness was insulting. Serena found her voice. "Mason Eclat won't do this to me. I have a contract. I have protection." Elena turned. Serena swallowed but lifted her chin. She had built her beauty like armor, dark hair polished smooth, lips painted red, skin glowing under soft lighting. She had once been clever enough to charm rooms and hungry enough to frighten rivals. Elena had seen her file years ago. Talented, ambitious, undisciplined, brilliant at imitation, weak at originality, dangerous only when protected by someone else's power. "You do have a contract," Elena said. Serena's eyes flickered. Elena nodded to Margaret. The screen changed again, now showing Serena's employment agreement with Mason Eclat. Her name appeared beneath a paragraph highlighted in gold. Margaret read aloud. "Any employee found guilty of intellectual theft, reputational fraud, undisclosed conflict of interest, unauthorized use of proprietary designs, or conduct intended to damage the company or its beneficial owner shall face immediate termination, forfeiture of all pending compensation, clawback of signing bonuses, and permanent exclusion from all affiliated houses." Serena shook her head. "Beneficial owner." Elena said nothing. The screen changed. A document appeared. Mason Eclat Holdings, founder and controlling beneficial owner, Elena Marable Cross. For 3 full seconds, the room did not understand. Then the shock landed. Not all at once. First among the fashion people. Then the bankers. Then the lawyers. Then everyone else. Serena stared at the name as if it had rearranged the universe. "No," she whispered, "AC is not real." Elena's mouth softened. "I assure you I am." Serena looked at Margaret. "You're the founder." Margaret smiled without warmth. "I never said that." The first sob escaped Serena before she could stop it. Elena watched her carefully, not with pity, but with recognition. Serena had chased power the way starving people chase bread. The tragedy was not that she wanted more. Elena understood wanting more. The tragedy was that Serena had mistaken proximity to a weak man for power of her own. Years before, in Mason Eclat's Paris atelier, Serena had stood before a board of senior designers and presented a collection called Crowned Flesh. Elena had watched from behind a one-way glass panel in the observation room above the studio. Serena had spoken beautifully, passionately, with sketches pinned behind her, but Elena noticed the sleeve structure first, then the waistline, then the crescent-shaped beadwork. After the meeting, Elena sent a note to Margaret. Watch her. Not because Serena had stolen enough to fire her then. Because she had stolen too carefully. Good thieves revealed what they wanted. Serena wanted to become the woman behind the mirror. She just never knew Elena was looking back. Adrian took another step toward Elena, desperation sharpening his features. Listen to me, I made mistakes, I admit that, but you deceived me for years. You let me think. I let you think I was weak, Elena said. You decided that made me disposable. His mouth closed. There it was. The truth with nowhere to hide. Vivian suddenly unclasped the necklace and held it out. Take it, take everything, but do not ruin the family name. Elena looked at the diamonds resting in Vivian's palm. For a strange moment, she remembered another dinner at the Vale Mansion years before the accident. Vivian had invited her into the blue drawing room after dessert. Adrian had been outside with his brothers. The fire was low. Rain tapped the windows. You are not what I expected, Vivian had said. Elena, still believing politeness had value in that house, smiled. I hope that is not a disappointment. Vivian studied her. Disappointment depends on expectations. Adrian is sentimental. I am not. I know you have money hidden somewhere. Women like you do not arrive from nowhere wearing restraint unless restraint itself is expensive. Elena had met her eyes. Women like me. Ambitious women, Vivian said. Women without old names. Elena had touched the bracelet on her wrist, the one Marable had given her. Old names are usually new names that survived long enough. Vivian's smile hardened. That night, Elena understood Vivian would never forgive her for not being intimidated. Now, in the ballroom, Vivian held out the necklace like an offering to a queen she had mocked as a beggar. Elena did not take it. A security officer stepped forward with gloves and a velvet evidence pouch. Vivian looked humiliated as he removed the necklace from her hand. The family name, Elena said, was ruined before I entered it. I'm only making the record accurate. Benedict lunged toward the exit. Two legal officers blocked him. Charles began arguing with someone on the phone, his voice rising until it cracked. No, don't liquidate, I said wait. Elena turned to the orchestra. You may leave. The musicians fled with impressive speed. Guests began edging backward too, unsure whether witnessing a dynasty collapse made them privileged or contaminated. Phones were out now, of course. Some recorded openly, others pretended not to while angling their cameras between flower arrangements. Elena had counted on that. A private ruin could be denied. A public one became history. Adrian saw the phones and panicked. Elena, please, he said. We were married. You remembered that today. His face twisted. I was trapped too. The words landed badly. Even Serena looked at him. Elena's voice dropped. You were trapped in a mansion, with my money, my staff, my name, my patience, and a woman in your bed who thought cruelty made her victorious. He flinched. I was trapped in a body I had to teach to obey me again, while listening to you plan my replacement outside my bedroom door. His eyes shone, but whether from shame or fear, Elena did not care. That bedroom door had taught her patience. During the second year, Adrian stopped hiding Serena. At first, The affair had lived in whispers, perfume traces, late calls, and Serena's laughter floating too brightly down the hall. Then came the open insults. Serena began entering Alina's rooms without knocking. She gave opinions about curtains. She moved books. She asked whether Alina preferred to be fed upstairs or downstairs, as if Alina were furniture with dietary needs. One evening, Serena stood in front of Alina's mirror, wearing the crescent necklace. Adrian sat on the bed, watching her. Alina sat by the window in her wheelchair, a blanket over her legs and a recording device sewn into the seam. "It suits me better," Serena said. Adrian smiled. "Everything does." Alina had looked at their reflection in the glass. Behind them, the sky was turning violet over the gardens. The old magnolia tree moved in the wind, scattering white petals across the terrace like torn letters. Serena saw Alina watching. "Does it bother you?" she asked sweetly. Alina lowered her eyes. Serena laughed. That night, Alina walked 22 steps alone in the locked east corridor after midnight. Every step hurt. Every step fed something inside her that was colder and steadier than rage. At step 22, she reached the portrait of Marable that hung near the library. Her grandmother's painted eyes looked amused. Alina whispered, "Not yet." And somewhere deep inside the walls, the mansion recorded her enemies continuing to speak. The mansion had always been loyal to Alina. Adrian never understood that. He thought owning a house meant holding its title, but Alina had restored the Cross estate herself before she married him. She knew every corridor, every service passage, every concealed panel left from older centuries when families had hidden valuables, letters, sometimes people. She had modernized the security under the excuse of protecting her medical privacy. The Vales had called it paranoia. Then they committed crimes in front of every camera. At the gala, Margaret handed Alina the folder at last. Alina opened it. The pages inside were not for her. They were for Adrian. She held them out. He stared, refusing to take them. "Divorce settlement," Alina said, "revised." He gave a cracked laugh. "You think I'll sign anything tonight?" "No, I think you signed it 6 months ago." His expression emptied. The screen changed again. A video appeared of Adrian in his study, drunk, irritated, and impatient. Vivian stood beside him. Benedict placed documents on the desk. Adrian's recorded voice filled the ballroom. "Whatever gets her assets moved cleanly after the competency petition. I don't care. Put my signature where you need it." The video paused on Adrian signing. Then the legal document appeared beside it. A spousal misconduct clause buried inside an agreement Adrian had demanded Alina sign during their first year of marriage, never realizing her lawyers had added a mirrored clause that applied equally to him. Infidelity, financial abuse, fraud, public abandonment, unauthorized liquidation of protected assets. Adrian stared at the screen. "You tricked me." Alina gave him the same gentle look he had given her in hospital. "You didn't read." Around them, the room's whispers sharpened. Adrian's charm had survived scandal before. It had survived rumors, unpaid debts, bad investments, and one suspiciously quiet lawsuit from a former business partner. But charm could not survive stupidity displayed in high definition. Serena suddenly stood. Her face had changed. The fear remained, but rage pushed through it, hot and reckless. "You think this makes you powerful," she said to Alina. "You hid, you pretended. You watched another woman live your life because you were too afraid to claim it." A murmur passed through the room. Alina looked at her for a long moment. Serena was breathing hard. Mascara had begun to darken beneath her eyes. The pearls on her stolen dress trembled. "I did watch you," Alina said. "That much is true." Serena lifted her chin, desperate for any ground. "Then you know Adrian chose me." Alina's gaze moved to Adrian. He looked as though he wanted to disappear into his own tuxedo. "No," Alina said. "Adrian chose the easiest room to enter." A few guests looked down. Serena's mouth opened. Elena continued, "You were never my rival, Serena. You were my audit." The sentence struck harder than shouting. Serena recoiled. Elena stepped closer. "I watch what you touched. I watch what you stole. I watch which assistants you bullied, which sketches you copied, which suppliers you bribed, which journalists you fed lies to. I watched you build your throne out of stolen fabric and borrowed power." Serena shook her head. "I earned everything." "Then you should have no trouble earning it again without my company, my designs, my house, my husband, my jewelry, or my silence." Serena slapped her. The sound cracked through the ballroom. For one frozen moment, no one moved. Adrian inhaled sharply. Margot's eyes narrowed. Security stepped forward, but Elena lifted one hand. Her cheeks strung, not painfully, not enough to matter. She turned her face back to Serena slowly. Serena's own expression shifted from fury to horror as she realized what she had done in front of lawyers, cameras, executives, and half the international fashion press. Elena touched her cheek once. Then she smiled. "Thank you," she said. Serena's lips parted. "For what?" "For completing the file." Margot almost smiled. The guests understood too late that Elena had not come seeking violence. She had come seeking finality, and Serena had just handed it to her with an open palm. A legal officer approached Serena. "Ms. Morrow, you are being formally notified of immediate termination and pending civil action." Serena backed away. "No, Adrian, do something." Adrian did not move. That was when Serena truly saw him. Not as a prince. Not as a rescuer. Not as the man who would lift her into the veil name and protect her from consequence. Just a frightened, cornered man calculating whether abandoning her might save him. It did not. Elena saw the exact moment Serena understood that she had betrayed a queen for a pawn. The room smelled of lilies, candle wax, spilled champagne, and panic. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Elena had not planned the weather, though she appreciated its taste for drama. The first rain of the evening had begun hours earlier, while the auction was still underway. Guests had arrived beneath umbrellas, laughing as valets ran through puddles. Inside, the Vales had arranged Elena's belongings on velvet tables with discreet cards and obscene estimates. Marable's sewing machine sat near a crystal vase. Elena's childhood sketchbooks were tied with ribbon as if memory were decorative. Her father's watch lay beneath glass. They had priced everything. That was their mistake. People who price everything often fail to understand value. Elena had watched the auction feed from Mason Eclat's private command room across the city. She wore a black dress with a high collar and sleeves fitted to her wrists. Her hair was pinned back. Around her stood lawyers, security consultants, financial auditors, recovery specialists, and Margot, who had said very little all evening. On one screen, Adrian laughed as he welcomed guests. On another, Serena admired herself in a mirror. On a third, Vivian instructed the auctioneer to begin with the sentimental rubbish. Elena's hand tightened around the old gold bracelet on her wrist. Margot noticed, "We can stop it now." Elena shook her head. "They need to cross the line in front of witnesses." "Elena, they crossed it years ago." "Not legally enough." Margot sighed. "You sound like your grandmother when she wanted revenge politely." Elena looked at the screen, where Serena was lifting Marable's sketchbook. "My grandmother never wanted revenge," she said. "She wanted receipts." Margot laughed once softly, but her eyes were wet. She had known Elena since the first Mason Eclat collection, when Elena was 22 and too proud to admit she could not afford proper lighting for the show. Margot had been a retired editor then, famous for ending careers with one paragraph. She found Elena steaming gowns in a bathroom before the presentation. "Your AC?" Margot had asked. Elena, exhausted and defensive, said, "Depends who's asking." Margaret had looked at the 7 dresses hanging from a shower rail and said, "Someone who knows when history is hiding in cheap garment bags." From that day on, Margaret became the face Elena refused to show. There were people who called Elena cold for hiding, but Margaret understood. The world treated visible women like public property. Elena wanted to build before they could consume her. She wanted the work to stand first. The name could come later. Later had arrived in a stolen ballroom. Now, as Serena stood under the chandelier facing the ruins of her future, Elena wondered whether visibility was always this loud. Adrian found his voice again, but this time it was stripped of command. "You can't leave me with nothing." Elena turned back to him. "I'm not leaving you with nothing. I'm leaving you with what belongs to you. My family will collapse. Yes, my mother, Jose, my brothers, Jose. I loved you once." That stopped her. Not because she believed him. Because the words opened a door she had sealed carefully. There had been a morning during their first year when Elena almost told him everything. They were at the Cross estate, long before the accident, before Serena, before the wheelchair. Adrian had found her in the greenhouse at dawn, barefoot on the cold stone floor, cutting white roses for the breakfast table. He had wrapped his coat around her shoulders without speaking. For a while, they watched the sun rise through the glass roof. "My mother thinks you're hiding something," he said. Elena's hand paused around a rose stem. "And what do you think?" she asked. Adrian smiled. "I think everyone deserves one secret." She looked at him then, really looked. He seemed sincere. So painfully sincere that Elena almost said, "I built Mason Eclat." The words rose to her mouth. Then Adrian added, lightly, "As long as it doesn't cost me anything." She laughed because she thought he was joking. Later, she realized that was the truest thing he had ever told her. In the ballroom, Elena held his gaze. "You loved what you imagined I was," she said. "Quiet money, a beautiful house, a wife grateful enough to forgive anything." His voice broke, "And you loved me." The question was cruel because once, the answer had mattered. Elena looked at the broken champagne glass near his shoe. "I loved the man you performed," she said. "He was very convincing." Adrian lowered his eyes. For the first time that night, he seemed almost human. Elena did not let that soften her. Human beings could still destroy you. Vivian, sensing weakness, stepped forward again. "Elena, think carefully. If you destroy us, society will call you vindictive. People tolerate wronged women only when they cry prettily and disappear. They do not forgive women who win." Elena smiled then. A real smile. "Vivian," she said, "I own half the magazines society reads and dress the other half for their covers." Vivian's face tightened. "And if society wishes to discuss me," Elena continued, "Mason Eclat's communications team has prepared 12 languages of correction." Someone near the entrance whispered, "God." Elena did not look away from Vivian. "Besides," she added, "you taught me something valuable." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "When you believed I had no power, you showed me exactly how you treat women who need help. So tomorrow morning, the Cross Foundation will announce a global legal and medical support fund for disabled women trapped in abusive financial arrangements. It will be launched in your name." Vivian blinked. "My name?" "Yes, the Vivian Vale Initiative." For a moment, Vivian looked relieved. Then Elena finished. "With every public filing from tonight attached as its origin story." A sound moved through the room that was almost laughter, almost horror. Vivian swayed. Reputation had been her religion. Elena had just turned it into a monument to her shame. That was the part Adrian never understood about revenge. The best revenge did not simply take, it renamed. Margaret checked her phone. Elena, the first injunctions are confirmed. Thank you. Geneva. Especially Geneva. Benedict cursed under his breath. Elena heard him. You should not have used Swiss accounts to move stolen art, she said. Benedict looked as if the floor had vanished beneath him. Charles whispered, we are going to prison. No, Benedict snapped, shut up. The lawyers heard anyway. Elena closed the folder. Tonight is simple, she said to the room. All guests who purchased items from the unauthorized auction will receive notice for immediate return. Anyone who cooperates will face no action from me. Anyone who attempts to hide, transfer, damage, or resell cross-property will discover how bored my legal department has been for 3 years. Several guests immediately began placing their auction paddles on nearby tables. A billionaire shipping heir raised his hand like a schoolboy. I bought the watch. It's still in the case. Wise, Margaret said. Another guest whispered, I knew something was off. Elena glanced at him. He looked away. People loved saying they knew after proof arrived. Serena suddenly began pulling at the engagement ring on her finger. It would not come off at first. Her hands were shaking too badly. When it finally slipped free, she threw it at Adrian. It hit his chest and dropped to the floor. You said she was nothing, Serena hissed. Adrian stared at her. You believed me because you wanted to. And you used me. You used me first. Their voices rose, ugly and naked. Elena watched without interrupting. There it was again. Enemies destroying themselves. Serena turned on Vivian. You told me the estate would be mine. Vivian snapped. I told you to be useful. Serena laughed wildly. Useful? I kept your son entertained while you robbed his wife. Enough, Adrian shouted. No, Serena said. Not enough. You promised me Mason Eclat would appoint me creative director once your family finished its acquisition. The room went very still. Elena slowly turned to Adrian. He closed his eyes. That had been the missing piece. Margaret's head lifted slightly. Vivian looked at Serena as if she had just set herself on fire in the middle of the ballroom. Elena's voice was calm. What acquisition? Serena realized too late that she had spoken from rage, not strategy. Adrian whispered, Serena. But the screen behind them was already changing, controlled from the command room by Elena's team. Financial projections appeared, internal veil documents, a proposed hostile acquisition structure, a plan to use Elena's supposed incompetency, marital access, and forged estate collateral to secure leverage over Mason Eclat through a chain of shell entities. It was absurd. It was ambitious. It was doomed. But it was there. Margaret stared at the screen with pure disgust. They tried to buy us with stolen furniture. A ripple of stunned laughter passed through the room. Elena did not laugh. She looked at Adrian. You were not only replacing me, she said, you were trying to steal my company. He spread his hands helplessly. I didn't know it was yours. The answer was so pathetic it became unforgettable. Elena stepped closer until they stood less than a breath apart. That is not a defense, she said. That is the story of your life. Adrian's face crumpled. Behind him, the Vale family collapsed into accusation. Vivian blamed Benedict. Benedict blamed Charles. Charles blamed Adrian. Serena blamed everyone. The guests watched, hungry despite themselves. Elena felt no joy. That surprised her a little. She had imagined this moment during therapy sessions when her muscles shook and her bones felt like glass. She had imagined triumph while Serena's laughter echoed through the halls. She had imagined satisfaction when Adrian signed false papers beside her bed, believing her asleep. But standing there now, victorious, she felt something cleaner than joy. Release. The house was exhaling. The woman in the wheelchair was gone. Not dead, not erased, simply no longer needed. Elena turned toward the grand staircase. At its top hung the portrait of Marable Cross, restored the year before Elena's wedding. The old woman in the painting wore a dark dress, silver hair pinned neatly, one hand resting on a table beside a spool of gold thread. Adrian had once suggested moving the portrait to a less visible hallway. "She looks judgmental," he had said. "She is," Elena replied. Tonight, under the chandelier light, Marable seemed almost pleased. A memory returned so suddenly, Elena felt it in her chest. She was 12, sitting under the cutting table in Marable's shop during a storm because thunder frightened her then. Marable worked above her, scissors sliding through silk. "Do you know why I use gold thread in the hidden seams?" Marable asked. Elena peeked out. "Because it's pretty." "No, because no one sees it, unless the dress is turned inside out." "Then why use it?" Marable bent down and tapped Elena's nose. "Because hidden things still matter." Elena looked around the ballroom, at every hidden thing now exposed. Yes, she thought. They do. The police did not arrive with sirens. That would have been too crude for this neighborhood. They arrived quietly through the side entrance, accompanied by financial crimes investigators and 2 court officers carrying sealed orders. The party ended not with a dramatic chase, but with signatures, phones confiscated under warrant, and rich people learning that marble floors did not make legal consequences softer. Vivian tried to leave first. A court officer stopped her. Benedict shouted about unlawful detention. A lawyer informed him he was free to leave after surrendering requested documents and confirming his address. Charles cried. Adrian stood motionless. Serena kept looking at Elena, not with hatred now, but with a kind of devastated fascination. It was the look of someone staring at a locked door and realizing she had spent years worshipping the wrong side of it. When the officers reached her, Serena said, "Will I go to jail?" Elena did not answer. That was for courts. Serena's voice dropped. "Did you ever consider helping me?" The question was unexpected. Elena studied her. Beneath the makeup, beneath the ambition, Serena looked young in that moment. Not innocent, never innocent, but young in the way hunger could freeze a person at the age they first believed love and success were things to steal before someone else took them. "I did help you," Elena said. Serena blinked. "I approved your scholarship when Mason Eclat recruited you. I defended your first collection when 2 directors said you were too rough. I sent notes on your tailoring. I doubled your development budget after Paris." Serena's face twisted. "That was you." "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to see what you would become when you thought no powerful person was watching." Serena's eyes filled. Elena felt no satisfaction in it. "You could have been extraordinary," she said. Serena looked down at the stolen dress. For once, she had no answer. Adrian waited until the officers moved away before speaking again. "Elena." She almost kept walking. But a story needed its final page. She turned. He looked smaller now, not physically. Adrian was still tall, still handsome, still wearing a tuxedo worth more than some people's cars, but the invisible architecture around him had fallen. Name, money, family, entitlement, charm, all the pillars that had held him above consequence lay in dust. "What happens to me?" he asked. Elena's expression did not change. "You live with yourself." He flinched as if she had struck him. It was not mercy. It was worse. He would have preferred a dramatic punishment, something that made him the hero of his own suffering. Instead, Elena left him ordinary, exposed, and responsible. She turned away. The ballroom doors opened before her. Rain had stopped. The terrace beyond shone under moonlight, every stone washed clean. The magnolia tree moved gently in the wet breeze. White petals lay scattered across the ground, just as they had on the night Serena wore Marable's necklace. Margaret joined Elena outside. For a while, neither woman spoke. Inside, the Vale family's voices continued in fragments: protests, accusations, pleas, legal warnings. Beyond the terrace, the city glittered as if nothing had happened. Margaret finally said, "You know the press will want you. They can want. You revealed yourself tonight." "I revealed enough." Margaret smiled. "That sounds like no." Elena looked down at her feet. Her shoes were wet from the terrace. 3 years ago, she had counted every step like a miracle. Tonight, she had crossed a ballroom and ended a dynasty. "My grandmother used to say hidden things still matter," Elena said. She was right. Yes, Elena looked back through the glass doors. Serena was sitting in a chair now, speaking to an officer. Adrian stood alone beneath the chandelier. Vivian stared at nothing, but sometimes hidden things become poison if they stay hidden too long. Margaret studied her. "And you?" Elena breathed in the rain-clean air. "I am not hiding anymore." The announcement hit the world at 6:00 a.m. Mason Eclat did not release a scandalous statement. It released a clean, devastating document titled Founder Disclosure and Ethical Recovery Action. Attached were legal filings, asset recovery notices, termination announcements, foundation details, and a single photograph. Elena Cross, founder and controlling owner of Mason Eclat, standing in the Cross Estate ballroom beneath the portrait of Marable Cross. No wheelchair. No husband. No apology. By 6:07, every major fashion outlet had the story. By 6:19, financial networks were discussing Vale Holdings' collapse. By 6:31, Serena Morau's name had been removed from Mason Eclat's website. By 7:00, Vivian Vale's charity board memberships began disappearing. By noon, the first auctioned items were returned. The watch came back in a black velvet case with a handwritten apology from the shipping heir. The sketchbooks came back by courier. The sewing machine required 3 recovery specialists, 2 lawyers, and 1 deeply frightened auction consultant. Elena was there when it returned. The old machine was carried into Marable's restored shop, which Elena had preserved inside the estate's west wing. Sunlight fell across the wooden table. Spools of thread lined the shelves. A faint scent of lavender lingered because Elena paid the housekeeper to place fresh sachets there every Monday. She touched the machine gently. For years, she had thought revenge would feel like taking back a crown. Instead, it felt like returning a tool to its proper table. Margaret stood in the doorway. "The board is ready when you are." Elena nodded, but did not move. On the wall hung a photograph of Marable as a young woman, standing outside her first shop with one hand on the door and the other holding a pair of scissors. She was not smiling. She looked determined, almost annoyed, as if the photographer had interrupted her work. Elena laughed softly. "What?" Margaret asked. She would hate how dramatic last night was. "Your grandmother once wore red to a banker's funeral because he denied her alone." Elena looked over. That story was true. "Very." Elena smiled. Then her phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number, though she knew who it was before answering. "Adrian." Margaret's expression hardened. "You don't have to." "I know." Elena answered and said nothing. For several seconds, only breathing passed between them. "Elena," Adrian said finally. His voice sounded rough, sleepless. "They froze everything." "Yes. My mother is saying you manipulated us." "She would. Benedict says he's hiring criminal counsel." "He should." A pause. "I'm at the townhouse," he said. "Reporters are outside." Elena looked at the sewing machine. "That sounds uncomfortable." He swallowed. I deserve that. Yes. Another silence. Then he said, did you ever plan to forgive me? The question made her close her eyes. Forgiveness. People always wanted it once consequence arrived. They treated forgiveness like a rope thrown to drowning men, never asking whether the woman on shore had nearly drowned first. I planned many things, Elena said. Forgiving you was not one of them. His breath shook. I don't know who I am without all this. That is the first honest thing you've said in years. Elena. Goodbye, Adrian. She ended the call. Her hand did not tremble. That surprised her too. Margaret watched her carefully. Are you all right? Elena thought about it. Then she said, I think I am becoming all right. The board meeting took place in Maison Eclat's Paris headquarters that afternoon. Elena entered not through a private corridor, not behind glass, not as an unseen founder listening from shadows, but through the main doors. The building changed when people saw her. Assistants stopped walking, designers looked up from fabric boards, executives froze beside glass offices. Whispers rose, then faded, replaced by something more powerful than curiosity. Recognition. Not of her face. Of her authority. A junior pattern cutter near the elevator began crying. Elena stopped. Are you all right? The young woman wiped her face quickly. I'm sorry, it's just my mother was in a wheelchair after her stroke. People spoke over her all the time. Last night, when you walked in, I thought of her. Elena's throat tightened. What is your name? Amara's. Amara, Elena said. Send my office your mother's details if she needs support. The foundation begins accepting cases this week. Amara covered her mouth. Elena continued to the boardroom. The directors stood when she entered. Some out of respect. Some out of fear. Both were useful. At the head of the table, Margaret placed a folder before her. On its cover was stamped the Maison Eclat insignia, a gold needle passing through a crescent moon. Elena rested her fingers on it. For so long, the company had been her hidden body, moving where she could not, speaking where she chose silence, striking only through contracts and cloth. Now it waited for her voice. She looked around the table. Maison Eclat was built to make women visible without making them vulnerable, she said. Somewhere along the way, I forgot visibility and vulnerability are not the same thing. No one spoke. Last night was not only personal, it was institutional. Serena Mora rose inside this company while stealing from it. Veil-connected entities attempted financial interference. Internal oversight missed warning signs because too many people were afraid to question talent when it was profitable. A few directors shifted uneasily. Profit will not be our excuse, Elena said. Not anymore. By the end of the meeting, 3 executives had resigned, 2 investigations had expanded, and the company announced a new ethics office with independent authority. Elena approved Amara's promotion to assistant atelier lead after discovering 3 senior designers had taken credit for her structural work. She ordered Serena's stolen collection destroyed, except for one dress. The engagement dress. That one Elena kept. Not as a trophy. As a lesson. Weeks passed, though the world refused to move on as quickly as Elena wished. Her face appeared on magazine covers. Think pieces called her brilliant, ruthless, inspiring, terrifying, manipulative, iconic, dangerous. Men on financial panels debated whether she had gone too far. Women in comment sections responded with such elegant fury that several panels changed their language by evening. The Vivian Vale initiative received 14,000 requests in its first month. Elena read the first 100 herself. Women trapped in marriages where money was used as a locked door. Women denied medical autonomy. Women whose disabilities had made relatives treat them like property. Women who had been told gratitude was the price of survival. One letter came without a return address. It contained only one sentence. I saw you walk in, and I remembered I still had a door. Elena folded it and placed it inside Marable's blue jewelry box. The Cross estate transformed after the veils were removed from it. Rooms that had felt heavy began to breathe again. Vivian's chosen curtains came down. Serena's perfume vanished from the halls. Adrian's study became a legal archive for the foundation. The ballroom remained closed for 2 months, while every stolen item was catalogued and restored. Then, one morning, Elena opened the doors herself. Sunlight poured across the marble. No guests, no champagne, no cameras. Only Elena, Margaret, Amara, and a dozen young designers from the Foundation's first training class. Elena had invited them to study the recovered couture archives. Some arrived with canes, one with a service dog, one with a scar across her cheek, 2 with mothers, all with sketchbooks clutched like shields. At the center of the ballroom stood Marable's sewing machine. A girl named Leora approached it with reverence. "Can we touch it?" Elena smiled. "Tools are meant to be used." The class gathered around as Elena threaded the machine with gold. Her hands remembered before her mind did. Spool, guide, tension, needle. She pressed the pedal slowly. The machine hummed. The sound filled the ballroom. Not music. Something better. Work. Later that evening, Elena walked alone through the gardens. The magnolia tree had begun blooming again. White petals opened against dark leaves, luminous in the dusk. She thought of Adrian. He had signed the divorce after 6 days, not because he wanted to, but because every lawyer he consulted told him the agreement Elena offered was the kindest ruin available. Vivian left the country under the excuse of medical rest. Benedict and Charles turned on each other in depositions. Serena disappeared from public view after issuing a statement so heavily edited by counsel it sounded less like apology and more like a hostage note. Elena did not follow their suffering closely. That was another surprise. Revenge had required attention, freedom did not. At the edge of the garden, she found an old stone bench. She sat and removed the crescent necklace from her pocket. It had been cleaned, repaired, and returned that morning. Under the fading light, the diamonds looked almost modest. For years, she had associated it with Marable's strength. Then Vivian's theft. Then Serena's vanity. Now holding it in her palm, Elena realized objects did not carry only one story unless you allowed them to. She fastened it around her own neck. The clasp clicked softly. Behind her, footsteps approached. "Margaret." "Elena," she said, "there's someone at the gate." Elena turned. "Press." "No." Margaret hesitated. That was unusual. "Who?" "Serena." The name moved through the garden like a colder breeze. Elena looked toward the distant iron gates. "Is she alone?" "Yes." "Let her in." Margaret's eyebrows rose. Elena stood. "Not into the house. The garden is enough." Serena appeared 5 minutes later wearing plain black trousers, a beige coat, and no makeup. Without the armor of luxury, she looked smaller, but not weak, exhausted, stripped. Human in the most inconvenient way. She stopped several feet away. For once, she did not perform confidence. "Elena." "Serena." "I'm not here to ask for my job." "Good." Serena nodded. Her eyes flicked to the necklace, then away. Shame crossed her face. "I came to return something." She opened her bag and removed a small sketchbook. Elena recognized it immediately, not one from the auction, one from years earlier, from the first Mason Eclat archive. Serena held it out. "I took it before any of this," she said. "Before Adrian, before I knew who you were, I told myself I was studying technique. Then I told myself everyone steals from everyone. Then I stopped needing excuses." Elena took the sketchbook. Why return it now? Serena looked toward the magnolia tree. Because after everything was gone, it was the only thing I still wanted to keep. It was the first, honest answer Elena had ever heard from her. Serena's throat moved. I hated you when I found out, not because you destroyed me, because you helped me once, and I still became someone who would have destroyed you. Elena said nothing. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, Elena said again. Serena almost smiled, but it failed. I'm leaving fashion, she said. No one will hire me anyway. No reputable house will hire you. Serena nodded. I know. The garden settled around them. Somewhere near the fountain, water moved gently over stone. Elena looked at the woman who had worn her diamonds, stolen her designs, slept beside her husband, mocked her silence, and slapped her in front of witnesses. Then she looked at the sketchbook in her hand. Marable's voice returned. Cloth remembers every hand that touches it, so do people. What will you do? Elena asked. Serena blinked, as if she had expected a dismissal, not a question. I don't know. That may be the first useful place you've stood. Serena's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Elena stepped closer. You are not my concern anymore. That is not cruelty. That is boundary. But I will tell you this once. If you build again, build with your own hands. If you steal again, I will know. Serena gave a small, broken laugh. I believe you. You should. Serena turned to leave, then stopped. Adrian told me you were nothing. Elena's expression remained calm. Serena looked back. I think I believed him because I was afraid that if you were something, then I was unforgivable. Elena studied her. Then she said, being unforgivable is not the same as being unable to change, but change will not return what you burned. Serena nodded slowly. This time, when she walked away, she did not look like a queen or a thief or a rival. She looked like a woman carrying the first honest weight of her life. Margaret emerged after the gate closed. You're kinder than I am, she said. No, Elena replied, just finished. Margaret smiled, that may be better. Months later, Maison Eclat held its first public show under Elena's direct creative leadership. The fashion world expected spectacle. They got silence first. The venue was an old train station converted into a glass-roofed hall. No celebrity introductions, no dramatic speeches, no orchestra, just a runway lined with work tables, sewing machines, bolts of fabric, and gold thread under clear cases. On every seat lay a card. Hidden things still matter. When the lights dimmed, the first model stepped out wearing a tailored black coat lined entirely in gold. The lining flashed only when she moved. The second wore a white dress with seams stitched visibly on the outside, turning construction into ornament. The third used crescent clasps. The fourth carried a structured jacket made from archival patterns Marable had drafted 50 years earlier. Then came models with canes, models with scars, models of different ages, models whose bodies did not ask permission to be seen. The audience did not applaud at first. They watched. Really watched. From the front row, Margaret wiped her eyes without pretending otherwise. Elena stood backstage beside Amara, who was checking the final look. A midnight gown with a long, clean line and a hidden inner panel embroidered with one sentence in gold thread. Never interrupt an enemy while they are destroying themselves. Amara smiled when she saw Elena looking at it. Too much. Elena touched the fabric. No, she said, just enough. When the final model walked, the whole rose to its feet. Elena did not step onto the runway immediately. She stood in the shadowed wing, watching the clothes move beneath the lights, remembering the rented studio, the hospital bed, the locked therapy room, the ballroom, the broken glass, the rain. Then Margaret touched her elbow. It's time. Elena stepped out. The applause became thunder. For a second, she was back in the wheelchair, eyes lowered, hands still, listening to people decide what she could not do. Then she was in the ballroom, walking. Then she was in Marable's shop, gold thread looped through a needle. Then she was only herself. Elena Cross. Elena Vale, no longer. Founder, designer, survivor, witness, woman. She reached the end of the runway and looked into the lights. There were cameras everywhere, but for once she did not feel hunted by visibility. She felt held by it. The world could look now, let them. She had spent long enough becoming in private. The next morning, reviews called the collection historic. But Elena's favorite response came in a message from Amara's mother, written carefully with the help of speech software. I wore my red dress today. Elena read it 3 times. Then she sent back, good, wear it again tomorrow. At the Cross estate, the ballroom remained open after that. Not for auctions, not for veil parties, not for engagement announcements built on betrayal. It became a school. Every summer, young designers came to study pattern, structure, ownership, contracts, and the dangerous art of refusing to disappear. The first lesson was always taught beside Marable's sewing machine. Elena would hold up a spool of gold thread and ask, why use this where no one can see it? The answers varied. Beauty, strength, signature, secret. Elena accepted them all. Then she said, because hidden work still holds the garment together. Years passed, and the story of the night Elena walked into the ballroom became larger than truth in the way famous stories do. Some said she had planned it from the day she married Adrian. Some said she had never been injured. Some said Mason Eclat's entire empire existed only for that revenge. People enjoyed making women either saints or monsters because ordinary complexity required more imagination than gossip possessed. Elena let them talk. She knew the truth. She had been hurt. She had been afraid. She had been fooled. She had been patient. She had been merciless when mercy would have been another cage. None of those truths cancelled the others. One evening, long after the scandal became history and the veils became a cautionary footnote in business schools and society columns, Elena sat in Marable's restored shop, sewing a hem by hand. Outside, rain tapped the window. The old machine rested nearby, polished and ready. The crescent necklace lay at her throat. A little girl from the Foundation's family program sat across from her, watching closely. Did you really pretend you couldn't walk? The girl asked. Elena smiled faintly for a while. Why? Elena considered, giving the simple answer. To survive. To gather proof. To win. All true, none complete. She tied off the thread and laid the fabric down. Because sometimes people show you their real faces only when they believe you cannot stop them. The girl thought about that. Were you scared? Yes, but you still walked in. Elena looked toward the ballroom doors, open in the distance, sunlight spilling across the marble beyond. No, she said softly, first I learned to stand. The girl nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Perhaps it did. Elena handed her the needle. Now you try. The girl took it carefully, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Elena guided her fingers just as Marable had once guided hers. The stitch was crooked, then less crooked, then almost straight. Outside, the rain softened. Inside, hidden gold thread passed through cloth, small and bright and strong enough to hold.